G'day trendsetters, coming to you today with my review of the ultra racy, ultra sleek Factor Ostro Gravel bike. If you're a regular to the gravelcyclist.com website, this very YouTube channel, or the Gravel Cyclist social media, you'll likely have seen my unboxing and features video of this particular bike. Regardless, now it's time to crack on with the full-blown review. This bike is all about speed, no matter the terrain surface, and it takes many of its design cues from the Factor Ostro VAM bike. So you've got aero tubing, all that craziness, with tyre clearance for up to 700 by 45 millimeter. Glancing at the bike, it's quite apparent that every frame tube has been optimized for aerodynamics. Now, whether those aerodynamics play well with a rather large tyre casing such as 700 by 43 millimeter in this case, with the Panoracer Gravel King SK, I substituted these tyres versus the stock tyres, which are the 700 by 40 millimeter Goodyear connector. I really wanted to try a wider tyre casing for the long-term review of this bike. With that said, I have no way of determining if this bike actually made me ride faster because I don't have a wind tunnel at my disposal, but it might have made me feel faster, and that's what's important. Factor has left nothing to chance regarding aerodynamics. If you look at the front end, this cockpit is by Black Ink with an integrated handlebar. Then you move to the back of the bike and you have an extremely aerodynamic seat post, which would be at home on a road bike. With this integrated front end, there are no cables to be seen anywhere, so the wind will likely appreciate that. Your local mechanic may not. Well, hello there. And keeping the Black Ink theme rolling, this is Black Ink's 34 pair of gravel-specific wheels. They're optimized with a nice low spoke count, a 34 millimeter rim depth, which is between ultra deep and ultra low, so kind of a nice medium, if you will. Factor has taken into account the geometry as it relates to different tire sizes. So what does that mean? For example, look at a wider gravel tyre. It's wider, but also the casing is taller, which increases the resulting trail of the bike. Of course, reversing the scenario with a smaller tyre, say 700C by 32 millimeter, the tyre width is reduced, the height of the tyre is reduced, and you get the opposite effect of a wider tyre. Factor has split the difference, erring on slightly faster handling for a wider gravel tyre such as this Gravel King SK 700 by 43 millimeter, while at the same time keeping the head tube angle in mind and fork rake. Long story short, their theory is you'll be happy riding this sort of tyre or a narrower tyre such as 700C by 32 millimeters. That point now leads me to segue to the sizing of this particular bike. If you look at the sizing chart on the Factor Bikes website, you'll see there are no measurements for top tube length or head tube length. Rather, they're relying on reach numbers, which not everybody aligns to. Regarding my fit on this bike, thanks to my good mate Sully at Factor Bikes, g'day mate if you're watching, he did me a solid and measured the top tube and the head tube of this example, which then allowed me to figure out the stem length I would need for the integrated handlebar you see before you. You've got to factor all those things in with fitting this bike. So if you're uncertain, be sure to seek the services of a qualified fitter before committing to a bike like this, because this bike is difficult to adjust once it's been built. You can lower the handlebar, but you really can't do much beyond that. If you need to change the handlebars out, obviously there's going to be a bit of a problem with spacers and hydraulic housings inside the stem, steer tube, etc. Final point about the sizing, this is a size 52, but if you happen to check out the geometry chart on the Factor Bikes website, you'll see it's not a 52 in terms of top tube length, so do your homework. I cannot stress that enough. Grip set on this bike is the formerly top-tier SRAM Red eTap AXS 12-speed, the Explore variant, which centers around a 10-44 cassette. This drivetrain is flexible. You can also run a 10-36 cassette, which I have currently set up on the bike for riding some flatter terrain, paired with a 40-tooth chainring. I have reviewed this group set and it is excellent. You can check out my review linked in the description below. It's very relevant, I feel. But if you don't like 1x, this bike can be purchased as a frame module and you can build it up 2x if you so desire. I'll be honest here, I do prefer 2x. That's pretty well known over the history of this YouTube channel, but this drivetrain is a nice match for this particular build. Everything about it is high performance, right down to the inclusion of a power meter. Incidentally, there is now a 13-speed version of this drivetrain. It's SRAM's latest and greatest, and I have a group set on hand, so there will be a review of that drivetrain and its crazy cassette and everything else coming later. Wrapping up, the speed-oriented madness does not finish with just the overall look of the bike. The T47 bottom bracket, which is threaded, features ceramic speed bearings. In fact, I forgot to mention it earlier, the ceramic speed bearings also live inside this wheel set by Black Ink. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention there are mounting points on this bike. Now granted, they're not fender mounts, rack mounts, etc. You receive the traditional bottle cage mounts you would expect on the down tube and seat tube, and atop the top tube, my favorite mount these days, the bento box mount, the food mount, whatever you want to call it. And beneath the down tube, the place I refer to as the cow catcher position for obvious reasons. That's the tech specs covered. We know it's carbon and we know it's fast, but how does that translate into the real world? Does this speedy bike actually ride speedily on the gravelly roads less traveled? I think now is a good time to find out how the Factor Ostro Gravel bike rides. The Factor Ostro Gravel isn't the first gravel bike optimized for aero on gravel. That claim belongs to the 3T Explorer, a bike I reviewed a long time ago and loved, until about 100 miles into the ride when I really felt the fatigue of its overly stiff frame. I mention this because the Ostro is similar in that regard. It looks to business and is perfect if you're a fast roadie coming across to gravel, but there are trade-offs to take into consideration. Dialing your tyre pressure is critical and wider tyres are recommended. The ride quality is stiff and harsh at times. Factor does not make any excuses for this. It's pretty obvious in the marketing, but the fatigue will add up as the miles and the kilometres add up. Despite the rough riding nature of this bike, I absolutely love the fit, the feel, and how the Ostro handles in and out of the saddle. On the drops, it doesn't matter. It isn't a bike I would prefer for overly dodgy, rocky terrain for obvious reasons. The journalist bollocks parade out there who overly use the word compliance, well, that ain't happening on the rear end of this bike. But for some of the big name races we see nowadays with smooth road surfaces, this bike would be a solid choice, but riding 200 miles on it, yikes. Handling is superb if you didn't get that impression from me already. It isn't twitchy and nervous, it's just right for barreling through a corner or picking a line through a dodgy patch of somewhat gnarly gravel, even though you will feel it. Wider tyres really help this bike. The cockpit, mostly I like it. Somehow I got my fit just perfect. I really like the handlebars, including their tiny amount of flair. My only disagreement is the flat bar tops don't agree with my hands after many hours. Handlebar choice is a personal choice. Some folks may be right at home on this handlebar configuration. The seat post binding mechanism works well with a single bolt accessed atop the seat tube but beneath the down tube. The seat post hasn't budged, it's easy to adjust and all is well. I cannot vouch for how the Ostro Gravel rides with 32mm Roadie tyres. I'm sure it's fast and this bike could be a good one bike stable type machine provided you are aware of its shortcomings. This bike certainly isn't cheap. It's going to set you back in this spec about US $9,000, but I think that does include some decent value. You've got the top tier parts, well, formerly top tier parts from SRAM in that they're 12-speed, and some really nice top tier parts from Black Ink, and don't forget their power meter. There are lower spec builds of this bike available starting at US $7,500 with Force Explorer. And when you consider the frame module itself is US $5,500, then it gets difficult to justify the price of just the module, and then you weigh it up, perhaps it's worthwhile going for the bike with the group set. In summary, this bike is expensive. Its rough performance ride isn't for everybody, but if you can get past those factors, pardon the pun, this bike is pretty amazing. It's all about speed, performance, and not a lot of versatility, but it could be right for you. So there you have it, trendsetters, my review of the beautiful but stiff but fast Factor Ostro Gravel bike, designed for traversing your local and not so local gravel roads in a fast and timely manner. Obviously this bike is not going to be for everybody, but I hope this review went some way into helping you making an informed purchase decision. As always, thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Gravel Cyclist YouTube channel for real world, no bullshit gravel bike reviews such as this one. Real world, other product reviews, ride experience videos, and my favorite, general madness. Grumpy. Oh, settle down. Grumpy poo-poo pants. Yeah, he's a bad boy, isn't he? Yeah, beat his ass. Beat his ass. He's being stupid. What the heck is going on? All right then, I'll see you in the next video.